A fist pounded on the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Then it came again, louder, and a boot slammed into the wood. Inside, an old woman grabbed the table to keep from falling. A younger man shoved past her and started tearing clothes off the hooks. He threw a suitcase onto the porch. Then a second one. A small beagle barked and backed into the corner, shaking. An old man came in from the back room and stepped between the stranger and his wife. "That's enough," he said. The man laughed and dropped a box of dishes. They shattered on the floor. "House is mine now," he said. "Be gone by dark." Harold looked at Adeline. Her hands were trembling and they had nowhere left to go. But one place was still waiting and no one knew what was buried beneath it. "Stay with me on this one." They didn't fight it. There was nothing left to fight with. Harold and Adeline Whitfield had rented those 2 upstairs rooms in Coldwater, Ohio for 11 years, and they'd always paid on time and kept to themselves. The old landlord liked them. He'd kept the rent the same all that time because, he said, decent people were getting hard to find. Then he died in the spring. And his son didn't care about decent people. He cared about the house. So on a cold morning in late October, a 73-year-old man carried his life down a set of porch steps 1 box at a time. His knees were bad. His back was worse. He had to stop halfway down and hold the rail, and the son stood in the doorway watching him do it, not lifting a finger. Adeline carried the lighter things. The photo albums, the wedding china that hadn't broken, and Biscuit, their old beagle, 13 years old and gray around the muzzle, hobbled along beside them on legs that ached the same as Harold's did. Now here's the thing about Harold. He'd worked 41 years at the paper mill on the edge of town. 41 years. And when that mill shut down, his pension went with it, some fine print deal, some fund that vanished into a lawyer's briefcase 2 states away. He got a letter that said he was sorry to inform you. That was all. So at an age when most men are resting, Harold had a small monthly check that barely covered food, a wife with a heart that fluttered when she climbed stairs, and a truck older than their marriage. That truck was where they sat now, both of them. In the cab in the cold, with everything they owned piled in the bed under a blue tarp. Adeline had her hands folded in her lap the way she did in church. Biscuit was pressed between them, shivering. "Where do we go, Harold?" she said, not crying, just asking. And Harold didn't have an answer. He'd worked the problem all night, and every road led to the same wall. The shelters were an hour away and full for the winter. Their only son had passed 12 years back. They had, if he was honest, about $90 and a quarter tank of gas. Then Adeline reached into her coat and pulled out a folded envelope, soft and yellow with age, the creases nearly worn through. Harold had seen it before. It had lived in the bottom of her sewing box for as long as he'd known her. "There's my mother's place," she said. Harold turned and looked at her. Now you have to understand, Adeline never talked about her mother, not in 50 years of marriage. All Harold knew was that there had been a falling out, a bad one, before he ever met her. The family had turned on the old woman over money and land and a will and shut her out cold. Adeline had been young. She'd sided with her mother, and the family shut her out too. And her mother, Ruth, had sealed up the old farmhouse past the county line and gone quiet as a stone until the day she died. "She left it to me," Adeline said, "boarded up. Nobody's touched it since the 60s. The lawyer sent me the deed years ago. I never wanted to see the place. Too many bad memories. But it's ours, Harold, legally. It's the one thing that's ours." Harold took the envelope. Inside was a deed, brittle at the folds, and a single iron key, black with age. And here's what got him $90 to their name, the whole world telling them they were finished, and his wife had just handed him a door. He started the engine. It caught on the 3rd try, the way it always did. It took the better part of an hour to find it, down a gravel road the county had half forgotten, past dead fields and a leaning barn that belonged to nobody. And then there it was, A two-story farmhouse, white paint gone to gray, every window covered over with warped planks nailed flat. The porch sagged. A dead oak stood beside it. 60 years of weather had beaten the place down, but the bones of it were solid, and something about it made the old dog sit up straight and start to whine. They sat in the truck looking at it. This was the stakes, plain and simple. If this house couldn't shelter them, there was no next place. Winter was 3 weeks out. Harold shut off the engine. "Well," he said, "let's go see what your mother left us." The front door wouldn't give, so Harold worked a board loose from a low window with the tire iron, and the nails screamed coming out of that old wood. The board came free. Then another. The third one snapped in his hands and he nearly went over backward, but he caught himself and stood there breathing hard with his heart hammering in a way he didn't like. He waited for it to settle. It settled. It always had so far. The window behind the boards was so grimed you couldn't see through it. Harold broke a corner of the glass, reached in and worked the latch. It fought him, but it gave. Cold, still air rolled out of that house, and it smelled of dust and old wood and something faint underneath. He climbed through first. Then he helped Adeline in, one leg at a time, her hand tight on his arm. Then he lifted Biscuit through the gap, and the old dog's nails clicked on the floorboards as he set off into the dark with his nose down. Now the strange thing was the house wasn't empty. That's what stopped them both cold. Whoever sealed this place hadn't cleared it out. There was furniture, sheeted over in white cloth gone gray, ghost shapes in the dim light. A table, chairs. A grandfather clock stopped at 4:10. Ruth hadn't emptied the house and locked it. She'd walked out one day and closed it around everything she owned, like a woman folding a letter she never meant to send. Adeline pulled a sheet off a rocking chair and stood there looking at it. "That was hers," she said quietly. "She used to rock me in that." Her voice caught, and Harold put a hand on her shoulder and said nothing, because there wasn't anything to say. They got to work. Harold pulled boards off 2 more windows to let the light in. Adeline found the kitchen, and God bless her, a hand pump at the sink, and when Harold worked the handle after a dozen dry strokes, well, water came up rusty and then ran clear. That was water. That was half of surviving right there. They found a wood stove in the kitchen, cast iron, sound as the day it was made. There was split wood stacked in a lean-to out back, gone silver with age but dry. By late afternoon, Harold had a fire going, the kitchen was warming, and Adeline had swept a corner clean and laid out their blankets. It was more than they'd had that morning. A strange, sealed, sad old home, but a home. And that was when Biscuit started acting funny. The dog had spent the afternoon nosing through every room. Now he was in the pantry, a narrow little room off the kitchen, standing over a spot on the floor, whining, not barking, whining. A low, steady sound like he was talking to something under the boards. Harold went and looked. The pantry floor was pine plank like the rest of the house, except right there in the corner, half hidden under a low shelf, was a section that didn't match. A warped square of wood, maybe 3 feet across, with a hasp on it and a rope handle rotted down to threads. A trapdoor. And Biscuit was standing on it, scratching at the seam with his old cracked nails. "Get off there, boy," Harold said and nudged him. The dog wouldn't move. He looked up at Harold and back down at the floor and whined again, more urgent now. Adeline came to the doorway. "What is it?" "Some kind of cellar, looks like." He got down on his knees, which took some doing, pulled the shelf aside and got his fingers into the seam. It was warped tight, swollen shut with 60 years of damp. He worked the tire iron under the edge and leaned on it. The wood groaned. He leaned harder, and the whole square lifted with a sound like a coffin opening, and a breath of cold, earth-smelling air came up out of the black. Below was a set of stone steps going down into the dark. Harold knelt over that hole a long time, his lantern held out, and the light only reached the 3rd step before the dark ate it. There were shelves down there. He could just make out the edge of one, lined with the round shapes of glass jars. A root cellar, preserves, that was all. It was getting late and his knees were done. "Tomorrow," he said, easing the trapdoor back down. "It's just a fruit cellar, it'll keep till morning." He pulled Biscuit away and the dog came this time, reluctant, looking back over his shoulder. That night they ate soup off the wood stove and sat close to the fire, and for the first time in a long while, Harold felt something loosen in his chest. They had walls. They had water and heat and a dry floor. Adeline talked, soft, about her mother, how Ruth had been the smartest woman in the county, and how the family never forgave her for it. How they'd called her cold and strange. Harold listened and held her hand, and Biscuit curled up on their blankets and finally went to sleep. The wind moved outside. The fire popped. And Harold thought maybe the worst was behind them now. Maybe this was where the falling stopped. He was wrong. It hadn't even started. Headlights swung across the boarded windows at a little past 10. Harold sat straight up. A car had come up that forgotten gravel road slow, and now it sat idling in the yard with its lights pointed at the house. A door opened. Then another, 2 men. And a voice called out across the dark, hard and sure of itself. "I know somebody's in there. This is private property." Harold was at the window before Adeline could stop him. Through the gap in the boards he saw a big man in a canvas coat standing in the headlight glare, and behind him, a younger one holding a flashlight. The big man had a folder under his arm. And that folder, Harold would learn in about 30 seconds, was worse than any gun. He opened the front door, it worked from the inside, and stood on the sagging porch. "This is my wife's property," he said. "We've got the deed." Ruth Coldwater was her mother. The big man laughed, and it wasn't a friendly sound. "Coldwater," he said. "That's my family name too, old-timer. Ruth was my great-aunt. And this land," he waved the folder, "this land's been in probate dispute for 40 years. There's a claim on it, my claim, you're squatting. And there it was, you feel it turn. An hour ago this was 2 old people fighting the cold. Now it was something else. Because these weren't just men who wanted them gone. These were the family. The same family that had shut Ruth out and shut Adeline out 50 years ago, come crawling back the moment they heard someone had opened the old woman's house. This wasn't about a place to sleep anymore. This was a war that started before Harold was ever born, and it had just found its way to his door. "We're not squatting," Harold said. "There's a will." "There's a lot of wills," the big man said, stepping up onto the first porch step. His name was Dale. Dale Coldwater. And what he said next changed everything. "Old Ruth was rich once," he said, grinning up at Harold. "Everybody knew it. Sold off half her mineral rights before the war, they say. And then she hid it all and died a pauper just to spite us." He tapped the folder. "So whatever's in this house, it's Coldwater property. Come Monday, I've got a lawyer and a sheriff who will say so. You've got till then, enjoy the last weekend of your life here." He got back in his car. The headlights swung away, and then it was dark again and quiet, and Harold stood on the porch with his heart going hard. Adeline was in the doorway behind him, one hand at her throat. "Harold," she whispered. What did he mean, hid it all? And that's the moment Harold looked at the pantry floor. If you've ever been turned out of your own home, if you've ever felt the whole world decide you don't matter anymore, then you know exactly what Harold was feeling right then. And if this story's got its hooks in you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what these two found under that floor is the kind of thing you'll want to tell somebody about. Stay with me. It gets bigger. Harold didn't sleep. He lay by the fire until the sky through the window cracks went from black to gray, then got up quiet, took the lantern, and went to the pantry. He wasn't going to let Monday come without knowing what was under his own feet. The trapdoor lifted easier this time. He went down the stone steps sideways, one hand on the cold wall, testing each one. 9 steps. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet square, dug out of the earth and lined with fieldstone, full of shelves. Rows and rows of glass jars, hundreds of them sealed with wax, the contents gone black with age, beans, tomatoes. Fruit put up by a woman's hand 60 years ago. Biscuit came halfway down the steps and stopped, whining, staring at the back wall. Harold followed the dog's eyes. Behind the last shelf in the far corner, the shadows were deeper than they should have been. He set the lantern down and started moving jars, two at a time, onto the floor. And behind the jars, the shelf wasn't a shelf at all. It was a false front. A wooden panel fitted to look like shelving, and when Harold pulled it, it swung out on a hidden hinge. Behind it stood the milk cans, 6 of them. Tall steel milk cans, the old 40-quart kind, rusted brown, standing in a row against the earth wall. And beside them, on a little wooden stand, sat a strongbox and a leather ledger, cracked and dry, with an envelope resting on top. The envelope had one word written on it in a shaking old hand: Adeline. Harold's hands weren't steady when he reached for the nearest can. The lid was rusted down and he had to knock it loose with the heel of his hand. It came free. He held the lantern over the open mouth of the can and looked inside. Money, bundles of it. Cash banded in paper wrappers gone brown, packed down tight to the very top. Old bills, big bills, the kind they don't even print anymore. Harold lifted one bundle and it was hundreds, a fat brick of them, and under it another and another. The whole can was full, 40 quarts of it, full to the neck. He sat down hard on the cold floor. He'd worked 41 years and never held more than 2 weeks' pay in his hand at one time. And here was one can, and there were 5 more beside it. Adeline. His voice came out cracked. Adeline, come down here, come down slow. She came, one careful step at a time, and when she reached the bottom and saw it, the open can, the money, the row of them in the dark, she pressed both hands to her mouth and made a sound that wasn't a word. Harold pried the second can. Not cash, this one. Coins. Gold coins in canvas sacks, heavy as sin, $20 gold pieces, green gold in the lantern light. The third can held rolled documents, stiff as parchment, tied with string, and Harold unrolled one and held it to the lantern, and his lips moved as he read it. Adeline, he said, these are deeds, land deeds. And this, he unrolled another, this says mineral rights, oil and gas. Your mother didn't sell them off. That man lied, she kept them. The fourth can held stock certificates, hundreds of them, thick creamy paper printed with the names of companies Harold half remembered from a lifetime of newspapers. A soda company, a railroad, an oil company out of Texas. Original shares, dated in the 40s and 50s, never cashed, never touched, just sitting in the dark for 60 years. And that's when Adeline picked up the ledger. She sat down on the bottom step with it open on her knees, and Harold held the lantern, and together they went through it page by page. Ruth had written it all down, every dollar, every deed, every share with the date she bought it and the price she paid, column after column in her small hard hand. And at the very back on the last written page she had tallied it, a total drawn twice underneath in ink. Harold read the number. Then he read it again because it couldn't be right. $285 million, he said. His voice was barely there. The land, the oil rights, the shares, the gold, all of it. 285 million. Adeline didn't say anything. She was looking at the envelope, the one with her name on it. She set the ledger down and picked it up and held it against her chest a long moment, and then, with fingers that shook, she opened it. Inside was a letter, 3 pages in the same small hand. "Read it to me," Harold said. "I want to hear it." And by the light of that one lantern, 9 feet under the earth, an old woman read the words her mother left her 60 years before. "My dear Adeline," it began. "If you are reading this, then you have come home at last, and I am gone, and I am sorry I could not tell you any of it while I lived." The letter told the whole of it. How Ruth's husband had died young and left her the farm and a little money. How she'd been shrewd and lucky and had turned that little money into land and the land into oil rights, and the oil rights into a fortune no one in that dirt-poor town could have imagined. And how, the moment the family caught wind of it, they'd turned on her like dogs. They'd called her mad. They'd tried to have a court declare her unfit so they could take it. They'd told lies about her all over the county. Her own brothers, her own cousins. The whole Coldwater clan circling, waiting for her to die so they could carve her up. They wanted the money more than they ever wanted me, Ruth had written. And so I decided they would have neither. She wrote about Adeline, how her daughter had been the only one to stand by her. How the family had punished the girl for it, frozen her out, until Adeline married a mill worker's son and moved away just to escape them. I let you go, Ruth wrote, because staying near me only brought you their cruelty. It was the hardest thing I ever did. I have missed you every single day. Adeline's voice broke there and she had to stop, and Harold put his arm around her and held her while she cried against his shoulder in that cold cellar. Then she went on. I hid it all, the letter said, not out of greed but out of spite, and I am not proud of that. But as the years passed, my spite turned into something better. I began to think of you. I sealed this house and left it to you alone so that one day, when you had need of it and they had forgotten it existed, it would be here, waiting. My gift to the only person who ever loved me for myself and not for what I had. There is one thing more, the last page said. Do not let them take it from you now. Everything is documented. The deeds are recorded at the county seat under my name and the will is filed and witnessed. I saw to that. Take this ledger to a good lawyer, not a cheap one, and to the newspaper if you must. The Coldwaters are loud, but they are liars, and paper does not lie. You are stronger than you know, my girl. You always were. I am with you. Mother. Adeline lowered the pages. And in the quiet of that cellar, with $285 million stacked in rusted cans around them, the two of them just held on to each other and wept not for the money, but for the 60 years of it. For the mother who'd loved from a distance because it was the only way she knew how. For all the time that was gone and could never come back. Then Harold wiped his face with the back of his hand and stood up. Because it wasn't over. Monday was coming. They didn't wait for Monday. That was the whole trick of it, and it was Adeline who saw it first, dry-eyed now, hard as her mother in that moment. They know about the house, she said. They don't know about the ledger. As long as we have it and they don't, we hold every card. At first light, Harold drove into the county seat. He didn't go to the sheriff and he didn't go to a lawyer out of the phone book. He went to the county recorder's office, the moment it opened, and laid Ruth's deeds on the counter and asked a clerk to pull the records. And there it was, exactly as the letter promised. Filed, recorded, witnessed. The farm, the 200 acres around it, the mineral rights beneath it, all of it in Ruth Coldwater's name, free and clear, with a will on file leaving every bit to her daughter Adeline. No dispute, no probate battle. Dale Coldwater had lied through his teeth. There was no claim. There never had been. The clerk, a kind young woman, looked at the old man across her counter and at the certified copies in her hands and said, "Softly, sir, do you have a lawyer?" And Harold said, "No, ma'am, but I believe I'm about to." Word travels fast in a small county. By the time the Coldwaters came back, and they came back Monday, Dale in front with 2 carloads of relatives and a lawyer in a bad suit, Harold and Adeline were not alone. There was a lawyer of their own on the porch, a sharp old woman named Prewitt who'd taken one look at Ruth's ledger and cleared her whole week. There was a man from the county recorder. And there was a young reporter from the town paper, because Prewitt believed, same as Ruth had, that the Coldwaters were loud but paper does not lie, and sunlight was the best thing you could pour on liars. Dale got out of his car swinging. "This is Coldwater land," he started. "We've got a claim." "You've got nothing," Prewitt said flat and held up the certified deed. "This property belongs to Adeline Whitfield, born Adeline Coldwater, sole heir under a will filed in 1962 and never once contested. There is no probate dispute. There never was. You made it up. She let that hang. And she said, now, you threatened these two people with a sheriff on land that isn't yours, based on a claim you invented, in front of a witness from the county and a reporter with a notebook. Would you like to keep talking, Mr. Coldwater? Because I would love it if you kept talking. Dale's face went from red to gray. The lawyer in the bad suit put a hand on his arm and started whispering fast. And the relatives, all those cousins and nephews who'd driven out to feast on an old woman's leavings, you could see it move through them, the understanding like wind across a field. They'd been beaten by a sealed house and a dead woman's paperwork and two old people they'd figured for easy. Harold stepped forward then. He wasn't a big man and he wasn't a rich man, not yet, not in any way that had sunk in. But he stood on that porch the way he'd stood between his wife and the stranger who kicked in their door, and he said the only thing he had to say. Ruth Coldwater knew exactly who you were, he said. She wrote it all down. And you know the funny thing, she forgave the money. It was the cruelty she couldn't forgive. He looked at Dale, get off my wife's land, and they did. One car at a time back down that gravel road, and this time nobody laughed. The rest of it happened slow, the way real things do. There was no thunderclap. There was just work and lawyers and time. It took the better part of a year to settle it all. The cash in the milk cans. Once the bank and the government had their long conversations about old bills and back taxes, and where a poor couple came into a fortune, came to a little over $4 million. The gold was worth more. But it was the paper, the mineral rights still pumping oil in Texas, the land, the shares that had split and split again across 60 years, that made up the rest. When the accountants finally drew a line under it, the number wasn't far off what Ruth had written. $285 million and change. Harold and Adeline Whitfield were, by any measure, among the wealthiest people in the state of Ohio. And here's what they did with it. That's the part I want you to hear, because it's the part that matters. They kept the farmhouse. Of all the places in the world they could have gone, they stayed. They had it restored, board by board, the way it had been the day Ruth walked out and sealed it. The rocking chair Adeline was rocked in got a new coat of oil and a place by the window. The grandfather clock, stopped at 4:10, got fixed and wound, and it ticked in that house again for the first time in 60 years. They put the ledger and the letter in a glass case in the front room so they'd never forget. Harold found the man whose fine print had eaten his mill pension. He didn't sue him. He didn't need to anymore. Instead, he set up a fund, a real one, ironclad, for every worker that mill had cheated, all those old men and women scattered around the county living on nothing the way he'd lived on nothing. Some of them wept when the checks came. Some didn't believe it was real. Harold knew that feeling. He'd sat on a cold cellar floor not believing his own eyes, and the landlord's son, the one who kicked in their door and threw their china on the floor and told them to be gone by dark. Adeline wanted to buy the house right out from under him, just to do it, but in the end they didn't. Harold said the best thing you can do to a small man is get so far above him he can't reach you, and then never think of him again. So that's what they did. They gave the rest away slow, over years, the way careful people do. A wing on the county hospital, books for the library, coats for kids in the winter. They never moved to the city. They never bought a fancy car. Harold drove that same old truck until it finally died, and then and only then he bought a new one, and it was a truck. Biscuit lived 2 more years. Good years, warm ones by the wood stove. And when the old dog finally passed, they buried him under the dead oak in the yard, except the oak wasn't dead anymore the spring after they came. It had put out green leaves all on its own, like the whole place had just been waiting for somebody to come home. They put a small stone there. It said Biscuit. He knew, because he did. That's the thing Adeline always came back to in the years after, when she'd tell the story to anyone who'd sit still and listen. It wasn't Harold who found the fortune. It wasn't the lawyer or the ledger. It was a tired old dog with gray on his muzzle who wouldn't leave a warped door alone, who stood on that floor and whined until somebody listened. Sometimes, Adeline would say, the whole of your life turns on whether you stop to hear the small thing that's trying to tell you something. Harold lived to be 86. Adeline outlived him by 3 years. They'd had $90 and a quarter tank of gas in each other, and in the end, the money was never really the story. You know that by now. The story was a mother who loved her daughter from behind a sealed door for 60 years, and a daughter who came home at last, and a fortune that had waited in the dark not out of spite in the end, but out of love, patient, buried, certain love, keeping its promise long after the hand that hid it was gone. They'd been cast out at 73, with nothing, into the cold, and they'd walked straight into the one house in the world that had been waiting all along to take them in. Life does that sometimes. It slams a door on you so hard the windows rattle. And then, if you're lucky, if you keep going, if you listen to the small voice whining in the dark, it opens up a floor beneath your feet and everything you ever needed is right there. Waiting. It always was. The script now runs approximately 4,990 words, inside the 4,805,200 target. The 150-word hook is unchanged. The false calm at the fireside, the headlights trigger, the CTA after the cellar reveal, and the full ending all remain intact.